Hi, I'm Rachel Abbasi. Welcome to the Recovery Daily Podcast. As always, thanks for spending time with me. Hello, happy Monday. Big day today. We are reviewing The Girl on the Train. So I read it a long time ago. I listened to it a long time ago. So we'll see. I'm going to remind myself as I talk through this. So I had already written the review of it and I posted my review on like Goodreads, but it's been a hot second since I actually thought about the book. So we're going to do our best here. But I was kind of reading through my outline and it was starting to come back to me. So I really, really enjoyed this book. And I've been finding lately that there's a lot of books about recovery, about a lot of these things that we go through that are still fiction. And I enjoy fiction a lot more than I enjoy self-help, which I mentioned the other, I guess Friday, I mentioned that, or Thursday, whatever, that my book that I'm writing is like a self-help book. It's like a self-help book, but it's also a little bit of a narrative. I guess it's narrative nonfiction. Still trying to figure out what it's called. But so it's funny that I don't really care for self-help, but I'm writing one. So that's funny. So The Girl on the Train, when I started listening to it and throughout the book, I thought this woman is cray cray. But I loved how the book carries you through to this ending where um, we see from, and I'm going to put a little warning in the description that there might be some giveaways for this book. So if you haven't listened to it and you want to listen to it, you probably shouldn't listen to the review yet because I don't mean to give anything away, but I likely will. So, my expectations were very different when I started the book from what I found in the end. And that is like, we're looking at life from her perspective, how she sees it without knowing the abuse that she had experienced in her life and why she saw the world the way that she did. I thought it was very intriguing the way that that the author brought us through that. I was not expecting this type of powerful testament to a woman's resilience after abuse. So, beneath the plot of the story is a lot about identity and healing and truth and hope. And that's why I felt like this book was really applicable to the Recovery Daily podcast and our Reads and Recovery theme that I like to stick to. So, one of the reasons that I connected so deeply was the main character's struggle to recognize her own worth. She's living in the aftermath of emotional wounds that have distorted how she sees herself. And so, as a recovering alcoholic and stroke survivor, I can recognize that feeling immediately. There are seasons of life that slowly convince us that we're less capable and less valuable and less deserving than we should believe about ourselves. And that makes it, for in my experience, made me question my own memories and my instincts and even my identity. I thought about myself so terribly during and right after my drinking, my alcoholism, my active alcoholism. So the character struggle felt very human to me and particularly like painfully familiar. I could not knowing though, that's the interesting part is not knowing throughout most of the book that her perspective on as she's riding on the train and she's observing this other couple, um, that she's looking through this lens of past emotional abuse. So one of the strongest themes in the book that I see is the psychological impact of emotional abuse. And it doesn't necessarily leave obvious personality scars or self-image scars. It sometimes just creates this invisible prison that we construct around ourselves. Like the walls are built of self-doubt, a lot of fear, a lot of shame, confusion, like uncertainty about who we are and the world that we live in. Because even though we know that, and I'm speaking from experience, even though we know that the world shouldn't be that way, since it consistently is that way, living under the roof of emotional abuse, it starts to feel like that's, I guess, the way that life is. I guess that this is, if not, if life can't change, then this is just the way that my story is going to go. And there's no other way about it. The author, I think, brilliantly captures that inner battle that occurs when someone begins questioning what they've been told about themselves. And recovery from emotional abuse begins when we realize that, I guess, when other people help us crack the door open to see that we're in a prison. You know, I had a lot of people tell me that I didn't have to live that way, but I didn't believe it because of fear. Like, no matter how many other people tried to help me crack the door of my own prison, I was too afraid to walk through the door because I was afraid of the repercussions. Again, I'm only talking about emotional abuse from my experience. Um, but finally getting through the door, whatever it was that takes us to that process of awakening, it's not dramatic. Like for me, awakening from emotional abuse took years. It took years because there's a element of control, and we start when we break free from that, like cut the leash, if you will, it's not like all of a sudden life is different and the emotional abuse is the past. It's it actually got me to a point where I was looking at it. Like when I walk through, it's like when I'm in the prison, I'm not looking at it. But when I walk out the door and I look back, it's like, oh my gosh, you know, how much, how much pain I was in, fear, shame, confusion, self-doubt, all that stuff that I was in and not even really noticing it, even when people were telling me. Um, so once I, you know, however it be, with me, a 12-step program, with me, um, counseling and so much to get away from that feeling of self-doubt. It's just, it's practice, I guess. It's practice having folks carry you, having people love you until you can love yourself, like they say in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then once you get to that point, staying in the pain, feeling it, becoming willing to face reality. Like I mentioned last week in one of the episodes, like I can't do anything about reality unless I'm willing to look at it. And as someone in recovery, I recognize that discomfort in detoxing from the chaos, whether it is from literally alcohol or whether it is from abuse. And the silence that follows abuse when you actually start looking at it is makes you want to made me want to scratch and crawl away from the problem. Um, but there is a solution. And there is structure that supports healing, even though in the beginning that structure can feel very restrictive and the structure can feel like it's the harder way. And the easier, softer way is to just not look at it, not look at the repercussions of the pain, of the emotional abuse. Um, I don't talk about this at all. So it's good that I'm talking about it. Um, both feelings are necessary in order to, I think, rebuild our lives. It's important to feel that it's, I think of it as we're all happy-go-lucky when we're drinking or when we're experiencing emotional abuse. It's like, even though I'm chained, I'm handcuffed in the situation, I'm still free from facing the problem, if that makes sense. Just like drinking, I'm free from facing the problem, but I'm handcuffed to the disease. That's how I would compare the two. And both of those feelings are necessary because it's like squeezing my self through. It's like a bottleneck that I have to get through where I'm bringing all of that stuff through this structured filter so that I can rebuild my life on the other side. I hope that makes sense. If it made sense in my brain. So, in the story, she increasingly starts drinking. And as I was listening to the story, I thought, oh, she's an alcoholic. Like this is great. I'm going to use this book in my recovery daily podcast in the Reads and Recovery program. And then as the book went on, I thought, yeah, yeah, she's an alcoholic. Like this is really great. I'm hooked. It's going to be a great story. And then in the end, it's like, oh man, this is even more applicable to recovery than what I originally thought. So the transformation in the story is slow. And I think that transformation, she doesn't talk about it. Like in all the little small moments and decisions and the little acts of, while I was originally reading the book, the little acts of what seemed like stupidity were actually courage now that I know she had been through emotional abuse. And recovery works the same way. So we don't just wake up transformed. We are transforming one choice at a time, um, by working within, creating and working within boundaries, um, practicing a little bit at a time, self-respect, and living one day at a time. How many times, if you read the book, how many times did she wake up in the morning and she think, oh my God, what did I do? That really resonated with me. I had a lot of those. But throughout the story, there was this beautiful thread of synchronicity, and the events unfold in ways that become meaningful, but they seem really random. And the book invites us to consider that there may be more happening than we immediately see, but it takes some time for that to come out. And then that hope comes out in the end, like near the end. From what I'm remembering, it was really close to the end where we start to see the evidence and then the hope starts to unveil itself, um, before we really understand what's happening. So I think the story reminds us, it reminded me to look beyond what is directly in front of me and remain open to possibility, not judge a book by its cover, if you will. So, both sobriety and stroke recovery taught me that healing happens when I stop running. And it begins when I become willing to sit in the discomfort long enough to learn from it. And the book reflects that beautifully. Like the main character's journey is not necessarily about becoming someone new, but it's her rediscovering who she was before the fear and the manipulation and the pain convinced her otherwise. Um, she's not fixing herself. She was finding herself again. And that is really when I think about my recovery and I think about my alcoholism and getting sober, I was finding myself again, even though that self, I hadn't known that version of myself. I call it Rachel version 2.0, but it's actually the original version of me before I started drinking. It's that me that I knew in middle school. It's that me that I knew in high school, but I didn't know how to deal with me. I didn't have the tools to live. And so it's like letting her emerge again. And now I've got the tools to deal with her emotionally. And in stroke recovery, I hadn't really thought about this until now. There's this side of me that got quieted through living life, being career oriented, working, trying to make money, raise the kids, there's this creative side of me, this quiet side of me, thoughtful side of me that I never sat with until I had my stroke. And that was, again, really uncomfortable. And so rediscovering that side of me, who I was before my career, before school, before the the hard emotional lessons of growing up. I was rediscovering that side of me that I enjoy. And And that's interesting to think about that this woman was rediscovering herself again as well. Um, a counselor once told me when I was going through my divorce, actually I wasn't going through it. I hadn't started it yet, and I was afraid. And the counselor told me human beings are more resilient than we realize. And it was when she told me that I found the courage to move forward. Emotional wounds deserve attention, and they can heal when we sit with them and look at them and feel them. That's what causes resilience, not ignoring them. And our inner dialogue matters. You know, the person that led me to experience emotional abuse, to put it in a very unclear way for the audience, experienced their own emotional abuse. And it created their own inner dialogue that was ignored, that was not helped by other people, that did not have a community, and therefore the healing never happened. I almost was swallowed by that same experience. I drank heavily and alcoholically far past the emotional abuse. My choices were based in emotional abuse. But with the right help, hope can survive even the darkest seasons. Freedom happens with connection. I believe that wholeheartedly. Freedom happens with connection. When we hear others talking about their experience, I talk about that with alcoholism. I talk about that with stroke recovery, with vestibular recovery. I talk about how important it is for us to be around other people like us that are experiencing the same invisible illnesses. And invisible illnesses includes emotion, the mental health. And when we can hear people talk about the emotional abuse that they went through and see them telling themselves their truth, like talking through feeling, looking back, experiencing, talking about that, then we can see that freedom and hope is possible. So I absolutely think that this book is a must read for anyone who has ever stayed too long in something that was breaking them. Anyone who, as a result, struggled to trust themselves, wondered if healing was possible, wondering if their original selves could survive, that that thought hope was not possible. This book is, I think, very impactful from that perspective. And that's all I'm going to say. So I don't think I gave it I guess I gave away a little bit, but I don't think it was too much of a spoiler alert. Um, so that's what I got from the book. And that's why I wanted very much to talk about it for Reads and Recovery. So if you haven't read it, the book is The Girl on the Train, and it's worth a read. I don't know if there's a movie or not. I didn't look at that. I don't think there is. I think I'm thinking about The Woman in the Window. The book, The Woman in the Window. I think that's what it's called. And there's a movie about that. But The Girl on the Train, very good. It's a recommendation. I give it 5 tail wags for Reads and Recovery. So thanks for listening today, and I will talk to you next time.